probably will have you go over there.
My
live stream camera.
All right, if we can get started here, I'd like everybody to go ahead and have a seat. We need to get started. We have a live stream link that is broadcasting, so we want to be cognizant of time. So come have a seat. Thank you for joining us. We've got lots more seats in here, so don't be shy. And we'll probably get our additional people in. Yes, if you can move to the middle, that would be great. If there's extra room in your aisle to kind of move towards the center, that would be even better. All right, we have plenty of seats down here in front as well. So thanks for coming tonight. My name is Abigail Hendershot. I am the district supervisor for the Grand Rapids District Office of the Remediation Redevelopment Division for the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. And I really want to thank you for taking the time to come out tonight. Thank you. There we go. With me co-facilitating tonight is going to be Diane Russell from EPA.
Hi, I'm Diane Russell. I am a community involvement coordinator with EPA, and I'm happy to be helping out tonight.
So you'll see Diane and I switch back and forth. We're going to live stream this event. I know there's a lot of people that are getting ready for spring break. They got a lot of things going on, but we really think it's important enough to have that opportunity. So for everybody who's live streaming, hello. Thanks for joining in from your recliners and your comfy couches. We also want to have this proceedings videotaped so that, again, people can come back to it later on. We've got, people from all over the world that are actually here tonight. We've got an actual Japanese public television station that is here doing our town hall to see how this is going because they want to be able to share this information with their residents as well. So hopefully you all picked up a comment card, a index card as you came through the door. As you hear things tonight, write down information on that comment card. We're going to have a time at the end of the presentation to do questions and comments. So feel free to write on that as we go through. If you aren't comfortable with coming up to the mic, because we will have some mics that if you want to ask questions at the end, we can do that. You can pass those comment cards if you just don't want to get up in front of everybody. That's fine. We've got a really good presentation for you tonight. If you're a science geek, you're going to get your science all on because we've got a lot of information to share with you, both from DEQ as well as from EPA. But what we're not going to talk tonight about is the environmental health pieces. We're going to focus on the environmental investigation, the public health questions, the public health PFAS exposure assessment. Those are going to be things that we have talked about in other meetings and won't really be the focus for tonight. But if you have those questions and you need to talk to somebody, we do have our public health agencies here tonight. We've got people both from Department of Health and Human Services as well as Kent County Health Department. So they're out in our cafeteria area that are available to answer questions as well. One of the things that I really want to take time, though, is I want to acknowledge that the last year and a half, 2 years, has been a pretty difficult situation for a lot of residents. And even though we're not going to talk about health questions and health impacts today, I want to acknowledge that the fear, the anxiety, just the trepidation of what could happen, what might happen, what you've been drinking, has been an issue that you guys have all been wrestling with. And this is not something that we're trying to downplay, but we really want to give you an opportunity to see the data that we've been seeing for the last few months and understand that this process is a slow progression. There's a lot of data to get through. We don't have all the answers tonight, but we're working on them. And so there's just going to be a lot of information. Another thing I want to mention is that this isn't going to be a PFAS 101 class. almost everybody here, if you're sitting in this audience, it's because you already know something about PFAS. You've already had your drinking water tested. You've already been in as part of this process for the last few months. And so we're not going to go through the basics. If you want a PFAS 101, visit our MPART website. We've got a couple of different presentations that'll take you through that kind of information. We're going to start in the middle. We're going to assume you know what the basics of PFAS. You know it bioaccumulates in our fish and our bodies. You know that it doesn't really biodegrade in our environment. You know that it's pretty persistent. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to start our presentation with tonight. Finally, if you don't hear your answer tonight, you got a question that's burning, you don't get the answer you want or that you need to hear, please contact us. We're all sitting here because we've spent the last year and a half, 2 years, really dedicated to this situation, to your situation. Your questions matter to us, your concerns matter to us, so don't feel like you're walking away disappointed because you didn't get a chance to talk to somebody. This is our community too, and we take this pretty seriously. All right, so Diane, what have I forgotten?
Were there a few introductions that you wanted to?
We have some special people in the audience. I really want to make sure we get a chance to acknowledge all of those people that are here. Because PFAS has been such a big issue for this community as well as for our whole state, we're getting really unanimous support across our legislature. If you can stand when I call you, I know that we've got representatives from Senator Pete McGregor's office is here. Where's he at? Pete, I saw you. There you are. Senator Winnie Brinks' office is here. Yeah. I think we've got Lynn Affandoulis. I think Lynn's here. Thank you, Lynn. We've also got Representative, I think Mark Huizinga is here, and Representative Rachel Hood. Is Rachel here? There we go. Thank you, Rachel. So we're getting bipartisan support, both for PFAS funding, PFAS research. I don't think this has ever happened before. Also, we've got Plainfield Township, Algoma Township, Cannon Township, City of Rockford. If you guys you might still be out at the tables. Our Department of Health and Human Services staff. We've got a whole bunch of DHHS staff back in the back. They're here to answer your questions as well. Kent County Health, they're back there as well. And then we've got a ton of DEQ staff that are here to support us as well. So if you're a DEQ staff, can you stand up for a minute? There's a few that aren't standing chickens. Okay, these are the stars of our show here. So Karen Voris, you want to wave your hand? Mark Worrell, our geologist. Jeff Kimball is EPA, and Diane Russell that you met. So Diane, you want to go through some of our basic rules for tonight?
Yeah, sure. So again, can everyone hear okay? We coming through all right? All right, good. So I'm just going to go through just a few housekeeping things, and then we have a lot of, as Abby had said, we've got a lot of information, so I want to get right to it. So just a few housekeeping things. First and foremost, bathrooms. You head out the doors here and then take a right, and they're on the left before you get to the cafeteria where the open house was. And as Abby mentioned, we are live streaming this for folks who couldn't make it and be here tonight. And again, thank you for taking your time on a Tuesday to be and occupy these seats. But if you could silence your cell phones so that if there's not any kind of interference as we broadcast this audio. Finally, just, a couple things on codes of conduct. Now, myself being native to West Michigan, I know these are really ingrained in all of us as Michigan nice. So this is really something that's not probably too new, but as we're going through this process, and obviously there's a lot of impacts to you and your family or people that you know, so there's a lot at stake here, so we understand that. But as we go through this and would like to provide information to you today, if we could respect each other and for the concerns of others, we're going to be interacting, and that respect is going to be key. Civility, compassion, and kindness, definitely for this difficult situation. Patience, because it does take time to investigate this issue, so that patience is key. And finally, the collaboration. We have public servants here that are ready to work for you, and it's going to take an effort together to find the best solution. So just wanted to make that note. Finally, if we could hold, just again, out of respect for everyone here, hold any solicitations for opportunities for your products or business or personal gain. So that's not what we're going to be having time for here to do that tonight. And then just to reiterate, again, we have a lot of slides and information. Don't want to PowerPoint you to death, but there's a lot of stuff that's gone on, and we want to make sure you have that information. So hold your questions until the point in which we have that scheduled the question and answer session. If you come up with a question as we're talking, many of you got an agenda, write it down on the back of that if you have that, or we have these comment cards, these index cards, that you can go ahead and write that down, and we will take those. So it doesn't mean you can't go and use the mic, so that's also an open option for you, but you do have that option, so maybe you don't forget. And when we get to a portion of the meeting where there's a break, you can turn in your index cards if you want us to kind of take the chance to read those if you weren't comfortable in front of the mic. We do have staff. If there's staff who would be taking those index cards here in the room, could raise your hand just so folks could look around and see who were the folks right here on the end here in the openings of the doorway, so they can take your index cards. So that is all I have. If you want to go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Diane. So a couple things, as we said, our agendas, we're going to get to the technical stuff here in just a second. We're going to go through PFAS results. We're going to go through EPA's investigation results. We're going to do next steps, public outreach. Diane's got a whole community engagement piece. And then we're going to get to questions and answers. So, and as Diane said, this PowerPoint is going to be, we're intending to put it out on the MPART website. So don't feel like you got to jot down all the notes. You don't have to take pictures of the slides. We'll get you the whole slide presentation, and you can download it in a PDF format and have it for later, okay? One note, I said we weren't going to talk about health, but if you got a letter from Department of Health and Human Services about the North Kent County PFAS exposure assessment, they want to hear from you. They're about halfway, over 300 people have already participated, already gone and done the assessment, given their blood, but their goal is 800. So they wanted to do 400 people that had been drinking, impacted water over 70 parts per trillion, and then 400 people who were under. So please participate. If you think you're in that affected area, you're one of those people that should have gotten a letter. Again, talk with our DHHS staff before you leave tonight to make sure that you're on the schedule to get a letter. I know they were sending those letters out in waves, but talk to them because they do want full participation. I think it helps everybody when we get this kind of information for our community. So you will see that out there. A couple of things that, before I turn it over to Karen and Mark, who are going to definitely dazzle you with the data, I just want to tell you, so it's been about a year and a half since we did a last town hall over in the Freshman Center in November of 2017. But even though we haven't done the big productions, DEQ has done over 27 small neighborhood meetings since that time. We've been busy. We've tried to reach every single little neighborhood as people requested information. We've seen over 1,700 drinking water results in the last year and a half. Done a lot of coordination with our local public health. Kent County Health Department, Department of Health and Human Services. We've been talking to those people daily. Responded to thousands of emails from you. This is what Karen and Mark and myself and our staff have been doing pretty much nonstop. We've investigated 110, so we got a lot of calls from people saying that they had a barrel in their backyard and they weren't sure if it was associated with a Wolverine dump site or if it was something else. 110 of those that we've gone out and looked at, photographed, try to determine is it really part of this investigation or not. Out of those 110, 24 of them were turned back to Wolverine for them to investigate and mitigate. We're also constantly looking at all of the submittals from Wolverine. We're getting, documents every day from them on whole house filter sampling, on additional monitoring well installations, on tannery reports. That stuff's all coming to us, and it all ends up on Karen and Mark's desk, and we keep going through this stuff. Lastly, directing and implementing hydrogeological investigation, which Mark is going to go into detail on, and I'll let him do that. Okay, so I think we are now ready for Karen and Mark. So they will give you a great overview of the investigation.
Can you guys hear me okay? Does not sound like it's... How about now? How about now?
Can you hear me? Okay.
There you go. Cool. Now I have the power.
Remember, your camera's right there.
Okay. All right. I'm Karen Voris. I am Environmental Quality Analyst with the Department of Environmental Quality here in Grand Rapids. I recognize many of you. It's good to see you again in person. And this is my coworker, Mark.
I'm the district geologist for Grand Rapids.
Yep. So we're going to give you an update basically on all of the PFAS testing results to date in our investigation areas. We tried to condense it to make it palatable in a half hour, and we tried to make it informative, and so hopefully you will learn something from our presentation. We're going to go through basically an overview of the investigation area. Mark's going to go into basic geology concepts. Then we're going to go over the residential well results, and then we're going to do the tannery, house street, and then the woven jewel, kind of 3 separate investigation areas, and really dive into the data for those 3 separate areas. We'll do a brief slide just to update you on the work that we're doing, state-funded work in areas not within a Wolverine investigation area currently, and then also continued work of what's next. So this first slide just kind of shows the large geographic area that we're dealing with for this site. It's about 20 square miles. And I have my little pointer. We wanted to show the Rogue River and how it's behaving in the area. We obviously have the Grand River to the south. And we have the main kind of drinking water well sampling areas in different colors. But right here we have the tannery right along the Rogue River in downtown Rockford. We have what we're calling the woven jewel source area investigation. And then we have, of course, the House Street site and the investigation area associated with that. So when we're referring to these different areas throughout, those are the main areas that we're referring to.
So one of the feedbacks we had from earlier town halls is that we use some terms that maybe were a little bit over people's heads. So wanted to have a quick basic geology lesson to before we delve into the data and use some of these terms. So this is a cross-section I drew. It doesn't represent any particular spot in the study area. It's kind of a generic area of Michigan that's been glaciated. So groundwater is simply any water that occurs beneath the surface. If it occurs in a soil or a rock in enough abundance, and it can be easily removed from that lithology, we call that an aquifer. So the areas that are kind of light blue here in maybe sands or gravels or even in bedrock, that's what an aquifer is. If there are geologic units that separate the aquifer that water does not easily flow through, we call that an aquitard. So that can be clays and silts or even types of bedrock. One of the questions that we have a lot is, my neighbor's well is clean, but I'm impacted, or vice versa. Why is that? My neighbor's house is only 100 feet away. So one of the things that we have to consider is where the well is actually screened. So if we look at this group of wells here, a shallow well that's screened in a zone of contamination, but wells immediately adjacent that are in different aquifers in clean areas, and so those would be non-detect. Similarly, we have kind of an area up here that maybe was a former gravel pit where superficial dumping occurred. And one of the concerns we have if new wells go into a source area or through a main part of the plume is that if these wells aren't installed correctly, they can actually cause the contamination to migrate downwards into a different aquifer.
And so with that in mind, we want to go over the PFAS drinking water well results to date. I know a lot of you have seen this map. We have it posted on our website as well. Basically, we have approximately 1,708 water wells sampled. We have it color-coded. Anything green was non-detect. So we have 923 properties with that. Anything above detection level and below 10 is yellow, and so we have 457 properties in that category. Anything between 10 and 70, kind of our moderate range that we keep a close eye on as well, is 204 properties. And then the above 70 parts per trillion, which is our criteria that we have here in the state, under Part 201 cleanup criteria, we have 124 residences that exceed that criteria. And again, we just kind of noted this is where the tannery is located, this is the Wolverine jewel source, and this is the house street. Mark will get into kind of the plume dynamics and what's going on there. But we also just wanted to note that in these areas, one of the main concerns we had going into this was making sure in the meantime, while all of the drilling is going on, while all the investigation was going on, that the risks associated with drinking the water were mitigated and that pathway was cut off. So there's been 537 whole house filters installed that are maintained by Wolverine that we also oversee sampling of and sometimes conduct our own sampling for QA/QC purposes. And there's also 234 point of use filters, which are the filters that go under the sink. They're NSF certified for the removal of PFOA and PFOS. Also in all of these areas, the option is, if you're in the sampling area, to get a bottled water service while this investigation is going on and we get things figured out. So that's kind of the update on the water well sampling results. And the next slide, we're going to focus on the tannery, kind of where it all began with PFAS. This is a figure that shows these triangles, which basically just represent environmental monitoring wells. There is over 53 monitoring wells currently on site installed by Wolverine's environmental consultant, GZA, and so those are monitored, and based on the results that we have as the date that we prepared this slide, you can see the highest concentration that we've detected on site in groundwater from the permanent monitoring wells is 670,000 parts per trillion. And that includes PFOS and PFOA, the two that we have regulatory cleanup for. And that's anything between 10,000 and 670,000, which is a big gap, but anything that's white is above 10,000. So you can see on the tannery site, there's quite a bit of PFAS impact in the groundwater. The purple is between 1,000 and 5,000. You see purple around. And then also during EPA's investigation, you know, they did a bunch of soil borings, which we'll get in, Jeff will get to, but we did find areas of, you know, impact of leather scraps that were buried and different fill materials, and those are noted in those areas right along the rogue. We also wanted to bring up that in order to mitigate the risks to the Rogue River, because obviously this groundwater, where is it going? It's going right into the Rogue River. A interim extraction system is being installed currently. 3 extraction wells have been installed south of Rum Creek currently that will extract the groundwater before it enters the river, and then it's going to be treated with granular activated carbon, potentially also resin, and then will be treated to not detect before it is discharged back to the sanitary sewer. And so those plans are in the extraction wells that are installed, and they're going to be doing further testing and pilot testing of those wells to make sure the 3 are adequate for that. That's obviously really important because our criteria for cleaning up groundwater before it enters into a surface water is pretty low. Does anyone here know what that is? 12. And we have concentrations as high as 670,000. Obviously, that's not good. So that's going to be, that's kind of one of our main issues that we're dealing with right now at the Tannery, is preventing that water from getting into the rogue. Also, I just threw up a picture of the Rockford Dam that we all know, and you can see the foam. We, last summer, sampled the foam. Our subcontractor had to come up with a sampling protocol of sampling foam, and so we have those results online, and PFAS, I think, was as high as over 250,000 parts per trillion in the foam sample, which led to the advisory the health department had to give with being careful with getting the foam residue on your hand and then accidentally ingesting it. So it sounds funny, but literally there was a do not eat the foam advisory issued for the Rogue River, and signs put up that say wash your hands when exiting the river and things like that. Because we know kids, you know, there's always the chance of accidental ingestion. And so that's hopefully what the extraction system is going to try to reduce those levels that we also see in the foam. Quick overview, you know, it wasn't just groundwater that they sampled, they also sampled soil. This is a map from GZA's final summary report that they gave to the EPA. All of the PFAS sampling was done for the state under our oversight. We asked them at every location they sample for the EPA, please sample for the DEQ for PFAS. So we were able to get data points for PFAS. And you can kind of see the elevated concentrations and where they're located. You know, it kind of makes sense historically with the old wastewater plant that was there, and different tannery operations in different areas where we're kind of seeing the elevated orange and yellow areas. And the highest concentration of PFOS in the soil was 4,400 parts per billion, and PFOA, the highest, was 360 parts per billion. Just to kind of give you a map. That's different than the water. The water's measured in parts per trillion. So if we were to convert this from parts per billion to parts per trillion, you know, we're dealing with 4,400,000 parts per trillion, just to kind of give a explanation of that. Also in their sampling, they did sample sediments. I'm going to let Jeff explain the sediment results. Just know the sediments that contain the highest level in the sediment samples were collected from right here, which kind of is very close to the elevated soil concentrations, and then also within Rum Creek that transverses the property in this area. Those were the two highest sediment samples. We don't have cleanup criteria for sediments, so we use what we're actually finding in the river, in the groundwater, to kind of understand what's going on, and then also the soil impacts. So it's kind of the summary there. So that's the Tannery PFAS. Obviously a lot of concentrations. Now we're going to move to House Street, and Mark's going to go a little bit, just a brief history for those of you that don't live near House Street and keep hearing it, what the history is of that.
So the history of House Street goes back to the 1940s, perhaps is in the late 1930s. Some of those dates we get from township litigation from the 1960s. In 1964, Wolverine actually purchased part of the historic farm to use as the House Street disposal site. In '66, it became a licensed disposal facility, and in 1970, it was mothballed. Some of the pictures here, on the lower right, this is a mid-1960s aerial photograph showing some of the trenches and lagoons. So material was disposed of in trenches, lagoons, and in depressions. We see lagoons and trenches in this aerial photograph. Some of the surrounding properties do have solid waste on it. This is drums on a nearby parcel, as well as leather scraps on a nearby parcel. And we, in the district, first really became aware of the site in 2017, thanks to a local community group that brought the site to our attention and helped focus in our study on it.
for going into the PFAS results, I kind of wanted to combine, just for ease, the waste. There's actual tannery waste, you know, still on the property that were disposed of in the lagoons, so that was sampled. And also the soils on the site, so separate from the waste material. That was sampled as well. And so these little dots show different soil sampling locations. Jeff's gonna, you know, have a lot of maps that look like this. I know it's kind of hard to see, but basically all the little yellow dots are soil sample locations. And then you can see the trenches that where the historical trenches were proposed to be installed, and then some actual lagoon kind of seepage pits up back in there. And so a lot of the sampling did focus on that area, and that is the areas where we found waste. Out of the 676 soil borings that were installed on the property, 284 soil borings contained waste, and that waste was sampled for PFAS as well. And the highest concentration in the waste of PFAS was 220,000 parts per billion. So, you know, very high concentration, highly concentrated source. Additionally, 874 soil samples were collected. Those are all the yellow dots. In the soil, you know, it's still not quite as high as the waste, but still a high level of 81,000 parts per billion in the soil. And the soil that had the highest concentration and the waste was really in the south central portion of the property. I don't know if you can see my green dot. It's kind of a depression area where we think a lot of dumping had occurred, and I think part of the thickest waste materials were found in there too, if I'm not mistaken. So the data makes sense that way with where we're seeing the really elevated concentrations of PFAS versus the waste. So we talked about waste sampling, soil sampling. Now we're getting into the groundwater sampling of PFAS on the site. And so it's kind of a big view because we're going to talk about groundwater going off the site. But right here we have up at the top with all those triangles, that's the House Street disposal site up there, the source area. You know, down at the bottom we have the Grand, and then we have our Rogue River as well. And so a bunch of, you know, the borings and the wells that were installed on the property, all of those were sampled for PFAS. Those triangles show the results of that groundwater sampling. And Mark talked about perched groundwater and then the actual deeper groundwater. The perched, the shallower groundwater, kind of that's intermittent with the waste materials and probably in direct contact with it. The highest was 550,000 parts per trillion in that perched groundwater, and then the deeper wells kind of below that in the actual aquifer, those concentrations in those wells were close to, I believe, 87,000 parts per trillion. As far as the residential well sampling goes, you know, we kind of talked about that on the other slide, but just to kind of show you, we kept those on to kind of show you how the higher concentrations are closer to the source area, and you can Mark's going to get into the actual plume. We do have currently 14 wells, permanent monitoring wells in 7 different locations on House Street property itself that GZA has installed. There's 34 wells at 13 different locations that have started to investigate the plume off-site. So those are those triangles that you see there. More of those are proposed. Currently, 12 locations are proposed, and eventually, you know, there'll be more and more as we get further definition and sampling. I'll let Mark now go into kind of the geology and what we're seeing where and why we think we're seeing it.
So this map is PFOA, PFOS. When I do my groundwater modeling, I look at total PFAS because that gives us a better idea of the whole plume. But you can kind of see the primary plumes that come towards the Rogue River from the site to the southeast. It looks like, based on current modeling, in that direction from House Street to the southeast, there's as many as 6 to 7 plumes based on depth, based on location, and based on concentration, chemical signatures. This plume, there's what we call a paleo drainage feature or a paleo stream valley. Paleo just means from a long, long time ago. This, along with a bedrock high to the north, controls that groundwater flow towards the Rogue River. Additionally, there's at least one plume that goes from House Street to the northwest that is currently not well understood. Really, to get a good idea of all these plumes, it's going to require wells in hundreds of locations, many wells at each location screened across the aquifer.
All right, so now we're going to move from, we did Tannery, House Street, now we're moving to the Woven Jewel Source area, and Mark will go into some history of that.
So this is the other disposal area we've looked at. This came about in a much more roundabout way, where House Street was historically owned by Wolverine, and Wolverine's acknowledged dumping there. This site was never owned by Wolverine, and they haven't acknowledged that the PFAS impact there is from them. They have sampled and they provided filters, but there's still ongoing discussion as to whether or not they are responsible. In the state's mind, we have multiple lines of evidence that speak to Wolverine dumping here. We first became aware of the site, conducting interviews, and people would discuss, my dad remembers liquid disposal waste at a gravel pit on the property. We kind of put that in our memory, and then when the area started becoming sampled, we saw concentrated PFAS concentrations in the area of a former gravel pit when we looked at the historical aerial photography. So we kind of took those, and those all lined up very nicely. There's some other reasons as well, but looking at the concentrations, the historic aerial photography, and then those anecdotal discussions we had with people, we came to the conclusion that this gravel pit, which was described as a farmer's gravel pit, we can see there's a lot more truck traffic in there than a normal gravel pit for a farmer would have. It was likely used from the 1950s into the early 1960s. That's based in part on, again, what the anecdotal testimony as well as the historic aerial photography. It did have a different waste stream, again, whereas House Street had that sludges. This appears to have been liquid industrial waste. And the sampling did start in the fall of 2017. There's also been some superficial soil sampling here that the EPA did. We asked for PFAS samples to be collected at the same time, and we saw abnormal PFAS concentrations in those soil results. The image up to the upper right is what we call LIDAR, light and distance ranging. It's a way to look at features that may not be readily apparent on a regular aerial photograph or on a topographic map, but this is looking at the paleo channel that goes to the west, the source area here, and this historic channel, which you can see as these lighter colors until you get into the Rogue River Valley, as well as some alluvial fans that help mark that location.
Thanks, Mark. So now going into the results of this area. Basically, we have 28 current monitoring wells that Wolverine's environmental consultant has installed. These are the different at 14 locations. So the squares represent different locations. At each of those locations, there's multiple wells screened at different depths, because we need to know not just horizontally, but vertically, what's going on in the subsurface, just because it is very complex based on the glacial deposits in this area, which of course only complicates things. DEQ, we've actually done some drilling kind of to the south down in this area. We call this the North Childsdale area. We did install some wells up in here as well. We're going to be doing some additional drilling up in this area. And so we've done 14 wells at 4 different locations, and we have 5 current proposed locations. We also wanted to mention the North Kent landfill, which is kind of in the middle of our investigation area. This is a landfill that accepted waste from multiple users, including Wolverine. They did have a sludge disposal cell, and some other industrial facilities, would have dumped there. That has a current monitoring well network around it and is being sampled. However, the concentrations at that landfill are orders of magnitude lower than the concentrations of PFAS that we're finding up in the source area here. Mark will get into the geology and groundwater flow and the interactions, but we just kind of wanted to mention this is also an area that has been sampled and is being currently sampled with their monitoring well network. The highest groundwater concentration kind of in this area is definitely in the 70,000 parts per trillion range. in the actual groundwater. And so I'll hand it over to Mark to discuss kind of the geology and plume behavior.
So this disposal site, as well as House Street, sits on what's called a groundwater divide. That simply means groundwater can flow in multiple directions. So our gravel pit source area is here. The main plume flows to the northwest towards the Rogue River. You'll see a large area of wells that are non-detect. What that means is simply those wells were installed either above or below the contamination. When I model this area here, I've actually never seen environmental data line up that nicely where you'd expect to see the elevations outside the plume match up to where you'd expect to see the elevations of the contaminant within the plume. There are additional plumes. There are two that go to the northeast. Again, these are all following these paleo drainage features. There's another one that goes kind of along 11 Mile. And then there are a number of them that go to the southeast. This area here gets quite interesting. We actually have groundwater flow there in 3 different directions. We have multiple plumes at multiple elevations. We do know that there's also a small plume that affects a small number, maybe 3 or 4 houses off the North Kent landfill, but that appears to truncate in this area here.
So definitely a lot of complexities going on there.
So we are continuing to do investigations. We are looking at, because of the behavior of PFAS in the environment, it doesn't necessarily behave the way of other environmental contaminants. And you have to look at very fine structure within the lithology. So one thing we do is we log the well in detail, but we also run gamma ray logs to look for minor changes in that lithology. It may all be sand, but there may be slight variances within that sand, or it may be gravel, but there may be variances within that gravel. When we do install wells at a location, this is one of our drilling locations in the North Childsdale area. We're using sonic rigs for a variety of reasons, but we install many wells at these locations. We install up to 8 to 10 wells at these locations. Again, because of the way PFAS may stratify in the aquifer, we need to look at every bit, every footage of the aquifer to make sure that we fully understand how it's behaving and how it may impact other drinking water wells or future drinking water wells.
And so basically, in summary, you know, the work that's been done, you know, what's DEQ going to continue to do with this investigation. One of our main priorities, and a lot of you know I'm very passionate about this, it's not just the red hair. I care a lot about you guys, and I try not to cry, but I care deeply about you. And so that's why we have done all of those meetings with you. We want you to feel like you have a way to talk to us, to ask your questions, and to get your questions answered. Even if we can't answer them, we at least want to be there to listen to you and go through this with you, so you know you're not alone. And we're not just in our offices like, oh, this isn't a big deal, because it is a big deal. Oops, skipping ahead. We're going to continue scrutinizing and reviewing all of the data that we receive under environmental law in Michigan. You know, the liable party or responsible party, you know, hires an environmental consultant, they do the work. We oversee that work. And so we do get a lot of data, a lot of reports. One of the most important things, in my opinion, that we look at is the filter data for the whole house filters. We definitely want to make sure those are working and that they're producing safe drinking water. And so we look at every single filter, all the data that comes in. We also do our own testing of that as well. So if you ever hear me call you, it's probably because we want to do a split sample with Wolverine at the same time they're sampling, just to compare results from different labs too. And so continue oversight of their field work as well. We go in the field sometimes. We're not just sitting in the office. We like to get our exercise. Also, we're going to continue our hydrogeological investigation in certain areas and our conceptual site models, which Mark will talk briefly about again, because we have a picture here. And then obviously, we all know we're in active litigation in the state of Michigan against Wolverine, which was a complaint filed in January 2018. So those things keep us quite busy, but Mark, do you want to go into a little bit?
Sure. So in everywhere that we see the appearance of a plume, as well as breaking out by geographical areas, we put together these detailed site conceptual models where we're looking at the contaminant concentration versus the elevation of the wall screen and the elevation of monitoring wells installed. So we package these up. We do a map of PFOA, PFOS. We do a map of total PFAS, and then we usually include a map that has some indication of plumes. Again, we're in need of many monitoring wells, so the lines are dashed or may just be an arrow showing approximately where it's at. And then we bundle these into just a quick 3, 4, 5-page write-up that explains why that contamination is occurring, where it is occurring, what elevations, what makes that plume unique, just anything that plays of where, why, and what that PFAS plume is doing.
And so a lot of you already have marks in my number. We also wanted to give our General Environmental Assistance Center number. If you ever can't get a hold of us for a reason, you can call that number and they'll take a message and get it to the right staff. And then also our website, we are putting all of our, the submittals, the reports and data and maps that we get from Wolverine, we are posting on our website. So if you go on that website and you scroll all the way to the bottom, it says Wolverine Worldwide Documents. Those get posted there as well. So it's easy for the public and for anyone who's interested to look at the data as well and feel like they can, you know, anytime can't sleep at night, you can go in there and take a look at some of the data. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Kimball with EPA to talk about his investigation.
I think so.
All right, yep, it's working.
There's the pointer.
And there's the clicker. All right, I'm set up, thank you.
Yep.
What I'm going to do, again, my name's Jeff Kimball, I'm with EPA. I am an on-scene coordinator for EPA. And what that means is basically I'm one of the field people for EPA that works in the emergency response program and the removal program for EPA under Superfund. So what I'm going to present here is the work we've been doing, oversight work and direction we've given to Wolverine and their consultants over the last year in collecting samples on both the Tannery and the House Street property. Why is EPA now? I know you're all familiar with DEQ, the work they've been doing with PFAS. There was some sampling done by EPA in conjunction with the state back in 2010-11. At that time, EPA handed the data over to the state and stepped back from the project in 2017, at the end of 2017, with everything going on with PFAS. And after our regional managers had talked to MDEQ and with some of the citizens around the area, EPA re-engaged in the project and came back out to look at not the PFAS, because the state was very busy in dealing with the PFAS issue, but see if we couldn't work towards progressing the investigations and potentially some cleanups if they're needed on the former Tannery and the House Street property. To that effect, you heard the state did a complaint to try and get work under PFAS done with Wolverine. EPA issued what's called a unilateral order, or an order where we told Wolverine, this is what EPA expects of you. You need to sample these two properties. And we'll talk a little bit about how that process went, and we'll see some of the results. I am going to try and squeeze this up a little bit. I think we're a little bit behind, and Diane's going to talk and bring some people up for the community involvement piece, and that's very important, so I want to make sure we get there. I also want to, for EPA, thank the high school for setting all this up and getting us in here. And for the community folks that I've talked to previously, thanks for showing up and being here tonight. And as you know, you can ask me any questions. If we don't get to it tonight, like Abby said, reach out to us. Diane here specifically to engage with the community and make sure we're answering your questions. And you guys have a way to get to me if you can't directly contact me. Diane's working in the community, so you can directly talk to me if you need to. And we have some other folks from EPA in the back, but let's move forward. So again, the way we're working this right now, DEQ's got the lead for PFAS. EPA is going to look at CERCLA. Let's not worry about what CERCLA means. It's basically the hazardous substances. When we hear heavy metals, volatile organic chemicals, those kind of things, that's what EPA is directing Wolverine to sample for states looking at the PFAS chemicals. And again, we're looking primarily at the two properties, the tannery and the former dump. And again, we want to come up in the end with this. We realized very early on between DEQ and EPA that it doesn't make a lot of sense for us separately to be telling Wolverine to do different things, because in the end, we want a comprehensive approach, the same game plan. If there's going to be cleanup, if there are going to be protective actions taken, we want to make sure it makes sense between what the two agencies are asking of them. So EPA's order, what did we task them to do? Basically, again, it was conduct the investigation and what? We told them they had to sample soil, groundwater, surface water, and soil gas. We thought there may have been some solvent use, so we're looking at soil gas at the past, and I'll show you some of those results. And also, during this process, we don't just tell them, okay, go do this, and let the company go sample, and we don't watch them, right? So every day they were out there sampling last summer. Almost every day I personally was on site while they were doing this work, and I also have my own consultants that were each at the tannery and at the House Street property that not only watched them sample, but every one in every 10 or 20 samples they took, we actually split half the sample and sent it to our own labs. So we independently verified what they were doing. Our job as the agency is to verify the work we're asking them to do. And then based on those results, so we ordered them to do all this sampling, and that took most of last year. It was a little bit bigger effort than we originally anticipated, than I think Wolverine's consultants originally anticipated. I'll show you some maps of why maybe that was a little bigger, especially at the House Street property. But based on those results, we have to look at those to determine next steps. And we're going to talk, Abby and I are going to talk about that in a little bit, but that's kind of where we are in the process now. We've got the data. The Tannery report, actually the report of their data and the investigation they did, should be publicly available now. We were going to post it up on EPA's website. I know some folks already have access to it. And then the House Street report is coming. I haven't finished my review. You can blame that on me right here. That report, when we finish up, will also become public once I authorize the final version of that report. And when I show you the maps, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of chemical analysis results, right? And if I tried to go through that all here tonight, people would throw stuff at me. We'd be so bored. There's so many chemicals results. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show it in maps that compare it to the screening values. So you'll see a dot on the map that compares it to either EPA's removal management levels. Those are levels of chemicals that we think should be removed from the ground, right? Or somehow protected from people being able to touch it. The same thing with DEQ's direct contact. Same thing. That state has different levels for those chemicals where they say we need to prevent people from being able to touch this material. It could be kids getting it on their hands, putting it in their mouth, ingestion hazard, those kind of things. And then we're also looking at drinking water criteria for the hazardous substances, along with, in the state's looking at the PFAS. And then this groundwater surface water interface. So GSI, if I talk about GSI, what that really means is levels of contamination either in the soil or in groundwater that above a certain level, they may impact the environment if they get into the rivers, into surface water. So we want, at certain levels, we don't want that material migrating into our rivers and creeks and lakes, right? That's what the GSI talks about. So it's more protection of the environment versus the human health. The direct contact, the RMLs are more, we're looking at making sure we're protecting the people. The GSI's generally more the environmental look. So you've seen, I'm not going to belabor a bunch of the numbers, but we've seen some of these numbers up before. You know, ton of borings out at House Street. And the method came up with was if they put a waste in that 20 feet, do a 20 feet core. If they saw any waste material in there, they would step out 25 feet and do another core until they found no waste. And then they would sample that clean edge. And the whole purpose was to find not only the types of waste on site, but the extent. How much is it? So surface area, how much is it? And how deep does it go? And in the end, to do that, they had to put in 676 locations. Many of those locations had more than one sample in the core, which is why we have more samples than locations. You know, we might have waste at the 3 to 5 foot, at 9 to 12 feet. in that 20-foot column of soil. So they did all the majority of the samples came from the clean soils, and we'll see those on the map. And then 254 of those locations actually saw visual waste. We were able to see it. And of those, they took 79 samples to define what was in that waste material, because we think there were between 3 and 5, depending on how you looked at it, different types of that tannery sludge there. In different areas, it would have different characteristics, different volatile or metals content. So we wanted to sample them differently so we understood the different areas of site. And also, every single core, 20-foot core they brought out of the ground was opened. It's a plastic sleeve that was opened up and screened with a handheld meter that detects metals and a different handheld meter that detects the volatile compounds. So every foot of that soil that came out was screened initially, and we used that data to help us decide where to sample. Soil gas, again, I mentioned this. We had some concerns to make sure that there wasn't any level of vapors in the soil gas that may be migrating off-site. So we looked at that. We also looked at House Street at groundwater. They had 11 permanent wells. And I asked them to put in temporary wells, which I'm going to call shallow or perched wells. In that top 20 feet, there were zones of water that didn't necessarily connect to the deep water aquifer, right? The aquifer where the wells are at. So my concern was not just what may be migrating down like the PFAS did. We know that went down and out from the House Street property, but what may be in that layer where it's contacting the waste and other materials, and it may laterally spread to the side, not just down. So I wanted them to sample that so we could look at it. All right, so we'll get into the maps and flip through these fairly quickly. Again, and before I start this, colors matter in the DEQ maps. Colors do not matter in this as far as levels go. If you see red, that does not mean bad, or green does not mean good. We color-coded the types of samples. So I just wanted to explain that before we move forward, and I'll show that. As we can see here, the red are the groundwater samples in the perched zone. That's where we collected these shallower water samples. And you'll see it's kind of near where the waste areas were when I get into it. And the yellow were the soil samples. A little bit better, a little bit easier to see map. So this is the map that shows where we did the visual inspection. This is just visual. The greens are where we saw no waste material visually. In the purple color is where we actually saw waste. And at a certain point in the process, I allowed them to stop doing the 25-foot step out if they conceded that the area left, this big blank area, we consider waste, right? To speed the process up. They get out to where we can define that clean edge and sample there to define the clean edge. Everything inside of that we consider waste, consistent with the rest of the points in the area. And what we saw was a lot of these waste pits matched up from the proposed design. Some of the areas didn't look like there was any disposal at all. So we also did a gem survey, which is basically, it looks like a big stick you carry around, but it shoots a signal into the ground and reads conductivity coming back. And we did this just to see if we could match up between where we see the waste areas here and what it might show us on the resistivity, and we actually got a pretty good match. So it was able to tell the difference between the natural sand soils out there and the thicker, what would be the sludge, more like a clay type material. We're actually to see that on this unit. And the only reason I'm showing this is we evaluated it for a potential to investigate other areas if we need to. If we have a sandy lithology and we know there's sludge buried somewhere out there, this may work as a first step. I wouldn't do just this. We'd follow behind with doing soil cores and everything else. And again, so here we get into some of the, we're going to breeze through some of these maps. So for in EPA and hazardous waste exceedances, so there were 5 spots on the property where we had a soil sample that actually exceeded the regulatory limit for what would be considered hazardous waste. So not the entire property, right? We know we just saw there's a lot of waste out here, but only in 5 spots did it exceed the hazardous waste level for disposal for EPA. Then we look at the residential removal guidelines for EPA for metals. These areas associated with the sludge exceeded some type of EPA level for metals, for the different metals, of what we would expect needs to be addressed. But remember, we also don't look to just the EPA levels because we're working with the affected state, which is Michigan. We're going to consider their levels as well for each of these contaminants. So we see DEQ's direct contact exceedances. You can see there's quite a few more when we get into direct contact. One of the reasons is typically states will have a slightly lower, more conservative value than the federal numbers will be. But in these type of projects, EPA actually considers that state number when we look at the effective remedy or how we're going to address the site. And again, I'm not going to be presenting specific data limits. What I'm showing you are the samples here are the ones that exceed that screening criteria, somewhere within that 20-foot column. And here we have the drinking water for perched. Remember this perched. This is not the, this level is not where the wells in people's houses around here are. This is the water we encountered in the top 20 feet of soil. So it's not the aquifer water, it's the perched water. But you can see for metals, VOCs in general, there's quite a few areas where we're getting detectable levels that exceed the residential drinking water criteria in that shallow soil. So we wouldn't want to put a well in this shallow zone. And then we get into the deeper stuff. And what we see here are a few of the general metals and general chemistry in those aquifers, but there are things like iron. Iron is in a lot of places. A lot of people have to put iron on their home drinking water system, something to filter out the iron in the first place that can be naturally occurring. So since we have these, then we have to look at what is the source of them and do we need to do something at them. What you can see here though is what we're kind of seeing from that deep groundwater, I'm sorry, let me back up. From the deeper wells, we're not seeing the same impact to those deep wells from the CERCLA or the hazardous waste and hazardous substance contaminants that we are from the PFAS. It seems like the PFAS got down into that aquifer and moved much quicker than we're seeing this other stuff. So we'll skip through, let me keep going. So we'll summarize the Tannery here. The Tannery, there was some less sampling out there, but again, we weren't expecting a lot of buried waste at the Tannery. We're expecting to see contamination associated with a tannery that operated there for years, right? It was a long time it operated out there. You would expect to see that in an industrial setting. So again, we did soil, and because we have river there, we did sediment sampling as well. We'll see maps of that. Quite a few soil locations, 244 soil samples still over that tannery property. And there were 12 locations we saw that actually had leather scraps in the soil that we sampled. And we know there's some exposed along the trail and near the river that we observed as well. For the tannery location, we also did groundwater, surface water, and soil gas. Again, all this is in the report that'll be available online, so I'm not going to bore you by reading numbers right here. We'll look at some maps again. And here's a summary of where the samples were taken at the tannery. Again, remember the colors don't mean good or bad here. The colors mean yellow are the soil samples. The kind of purplish magenta ones here are the transects. I said we put 10 transects across the river and the creek. Those are just lines where we put at least 3 samples in the sediment across that line. So we went above the tannery, upstream, all the way down to 1 transect below the dam there in Rockford. And from the soil samples, what we saw were there were 2 areas. One in an area associated where we've seen quite a few buried hides that we had exceedance for TCLP lead. So we have that one there, and then here in an area of a former building there that I know I've talked to some of you about, there was an exceedance for chrome at that location. So for hazardous, what raises to the TCLP value on these sites, we have 2 samples. Then we look at, again, the RMLs or removal management levels for metals and SVOCs. We see quite a few more sites. And the soils here were sampled to, I think, a max depth of around 10 feet-ish. We didn't do as deep here as we did at House Street because we had groundwater a lot shallower here from the soils. The blue you can see are that's benzopyrene. The yellows are metals that exceed those removal guidances for us. Then we look at the, again, same thing we did at the other site. Let's look at the residential direct contact. So those are the samples we have based on the screening level for the state's residential direct contact that exceed their value. Some of these may be 5 or 6 feet underground. Some may be within the top foot or 2 feet of the surface. So part of the process we're in now is looking at all this data again and seeing which ones are near the surface. Are there ones we need to worry about now versus ones that are deeper that may not be a direct contact threat, even though they are above those direct contact levels? And then here are those GSI numbers we talked about. These at the Tannery, we're going to see quite a few of, and I'm going to show you a series of maps here that all show GSI. So again, GSI is the level of that contaminant in the soil or the groundwater that we don't want getting into that surface water body. It could impact the environment. It could be accumulative in fish, things like that. So those are the areas where metals exceeded GSI. This combines the VOCs and SVOCs into that same look. And a lot of these, I'm showing you different maps because these are all the same sample. So it may have exceeded metals and volatiles and semis in the same sample for the GSI criteria. But as we saw, you know, it didn't have as many for the RMLs or the direct contact, but we get into GSI and we're looking at that, what's the impact potentially long-term to the environment? We got a lot more of those samples. And here's the soils. These are, again, the soils with metals, VOCs, SVOs, and general chemistry. And one of the things we had prevalent here, a lot of the green, again, green doesn't mean good, it means general chemistry, ammonia, chloride. We had a lot of ammonia, especially in the areas associated, again, with those leather scraps. The sediment for RMLs, we don't really have good RMLs or Part 201 direct contact for sediments. We have them for soils. So we compared them to soil data anyway to have something to compare to as we're working on getting our health folks to do several health consultations for us that I'll briefly mention in a minute. I'd like to get through this. So again, with the sediment, we have a few more areas that if it was soil, these levels would exceed for metals in the general chemistry. The one that we had several hits was near the boat launch, a little bit away from shore, down behind the shops there. And then here are the GSI. Again, what's the long-term potential impact to the environment kind of numbers. And these are the GSI exceedances for metals, SVOCs, and add in the general chemistry, including ammonia. I think I hit the wrong way. So here's the groundwater exceedances for metals in the groundwater. Again, these are GSI, so these are the environmental impact numbers. Again, GSI for metals, SVOCs, and VOCs, and adding in the general chemistry, including ammonia. And then I'm going to have Abby come up. And I know I went through that real fast. I promise we're going to put these reports online. If you guys want more details, you'll be able to get them. If you want to ask me direct questions, get with me or get with Diane and we'll talk to you. It was a visual presentation. Abby, do you want to take first stab at next steps and then I can follow up?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So I think it's really important for everybody here to understand that for the last year and a half, Jeff has been in our office constantly. We've been talking on the phone. We've had monthly meetings with him, at least one-on-one, as well as constant communication between jointly reviewing documents, talking about next steps. These things are important. They're going to continue to be important to us, to that collaboration, because while we are looking at this from a state looking at the PFAS, Jeff looking at it from the hazardous materials, hazardous waste, a unified approach is obviously necessary. We all get that. That's what we need. And so we're working very hard to make sure that that happens. So we're going to continue for the state side of it. We're going to continue to do PFAS plume definition and assessment. That's not done. Mark gave you those details of the geology, why it's so complex. I think you guys can understand pretty easily how complex this is. Filter oversight, Karen talked about that. That's still going to be a main concern. Priority is public health, protection of public health, making sure that these things are working for you. And then we're going to talk about interim remedial actions. the stuff that's being proposed by Wolverine to try to address the Tannery groundwater concentrations that are getting into Rum Creek, getting into the Rogue River. We're going to work with Jeff and get those figured out. Feasibility analysis, what's even feasible? How do you address PFAS plus the metals, plus the volatile organic compounds? Those kinds of things make treatment technology pretty difficult, and so it may not be one treatment technology. They may have to be layered on to try to find that, so feasibility studies need to be done. Determine are there any other areas of concern that we aren't addressing yet? Those are things that need to be looked at. And then the human health consultations that Jeff talked about. You want to go into that?
So I'll do that. And again, I want to add one thing in so that it's clear. We have some of our other local and city and local government partners in the room with us tonight as well. We've been having meetings with those folks as well as your federal, state, and local health folks. Along the process, as we've been getting data, we've been sharing it with them as well. And one of the reasons is Abby and I both wanted to know if anything rose to the level of an emergency. Did we get data that came back that said we have to do something right now, stop everything, we have to go out there, cordon it off, and do a cleanup now? The result we've gotten so far is no, we don't have that level of contamination that's an emergency at or near the surface where people can contact it, where it's going to be an immediate risk. However, we're in the next steps now, and this is what we're talking about. We have to determine, okay, we didn't have a stop everything, do an emergency, but are there things we need to do in 2019? Is there work that has to happen this year? Is there work that we have a little bit more planning time? Some of the stuff with the ecological risk assessment and the GSI work, the bigger project, more complex that Abby's talking about. Do we have some time to figure out how we're going to design a system that's protective of the environment as well as human health? So that's the phase we're in now. So we have looked at, is there an emergency risk out here? We're now looking at, okay, what's the risk for the next year? And then we'll look beyond that. And one of the ways we get there is, again, the ecological risk assessment is being conducted for the Tannery. That's looking at all that data and saying, what's the impact to the environment? That is already in the process. I'm hopefully getting that draft of that risk assessment in the next few weeks. The other one that we've started is our health folks that are in the room here tonight have been working with us, and they're actually going to do human health consultations at both the Tannery and at Howe Street based on the data that was collected last year. They're going to take a look and say, okay, beyond looking at your screening levels, what other risk is out there? And they're going to help us make some of these, especially more complex, longer-term decisions based on health data, based on what it means.
So some of the things, just to further expound on what Jeff just said, some of the things that they'll look at is, so if you're a resident of Rockford and you use the boat launch, you use the Rogue River for kayaking, what does that mean? What are those risk levels? We don't have recreational risk levels already developed. Those would be site-specific things that they would look at. How many days a year would they be coming in contact with the water? How many hours a year would they be coming in contact with those sediments? Those are things that all have to be done site-specifically and are modeled for each individual site. And so that's where we work very closely. Jeff and I would work closely with the toxicologists to develop those numbers. And so that'll be something that's going to be definitely developed in 2019.
All right. I'm going to, we're going to pass along to Diane and our community engagement folks.
Yep, great, thank you. And I just wanted to give a brief update about the community engagement activities we've been doing so that we can get to the part where you actually get to participate in this meeting. So again, my name is Diane Russell. I'm a community involvement. Basically, my job is two parts. Is making sure you all get the information from us. So putting together fact sheets, flyers, updating websites, making sure you have access to the information that our folks are working on. But the other half of my job is making sure that we understand from you what your needs are. So part of the community engagement that myself and my community engagement colleagues have been doing over the last several months, I have up here this is a timeline that's also in the fact sheet, so you don't have to worry about squinting and looking. You'll have it right here in your hand. But I'm going to spend some time just going over that center part, which is really the community community engagement that myself and my colleagues have been working on over the last several months. It's really been, one of the things that we've been doing is engaging in community interviews. I've gotten an opportunity to talk to many of you, several of you in this room. I've got to learn from you as far as how this has impacted you, how you get your information so that we could deliver that to you better. So I've since through August and November, talked to about 50 people in the community, learned a great deal. One of the things that the community involvement and the interviews that we've been doing will help in us build what we call a community involvement plan. It's a plan that allows us as agencies to articulate to all of you, after hearing from you, how you need us to communicate. What are your information needs? What kinds of frequency of meetings, those kinds of things. So we will be articulating that based on the feedback I've got from many of you. Community involvement plan that will be drafted in this spring, and it's a living document. Anyone here can look at it, give feedback, and say, and we can modify it as we learn new and different things. Through the interview process, one of the things that I talk to the community about is an interest in what we call a community advisory group. I'm going to spend the next couple slides talking about what that is, but first wanting to, this is hopefully going to be coming out in spring, so this is kind of what it looks like. This is what I've got drafted so far, a page and a table of contents. But hopefully this spring I'll have a draft to share with the community, so just keep an eye out for this as the community involvement plan so that we can get feedback from you to make sure that we're on the right track. So one of the things that we talked to the community about was a community advisory group. So let me just briefly talk about what this is. So this is an assembly of community members that are affected by the cleanup, and it provides a forum for those community members and many times the responsible parties and agencies to come together in a forum and communicate about what's going on with the cleanup. I work in Michigan, and I work across a lot of sites, and I work with a lot of community advisory groups. We have one associated with the Tittabawassee River Dow Chemical cleanup, Tittabawassee River CAG. We also have a long-standing community advisory group in St. Louis, Michigan, dealing with the Velsicol chemical site, that we work with that CAG as well. And we're actually building one now. We have a meeting this Thursday, just a kickoff meeting for the Kalamazoo River Community Advisory Group. So I work again with these groups to, again, making sure that we're getting information, we're communicating. There's a two-way communication going on as this cleanup goes on. These groups are helpful because, again, they provide an avenue for community members to give us their concerns and their perspectives. We don't always have access to that. Sometimes it's really good to have a standing meeting so that we can just have that automatically happen. And it gives us important feedback. So I can't tell you enough on how many communities it makes us make better decisions when we are plugged in and hear and know what's going on in the community, what the needs are. So basic facts about a CAG. Basically, 15 to 25 people. The function is it provides that voice. A lot of times community members need assistance organizing and creating a bigger voice on an individual basis. Frequency, regularly, so they meet regularly. The Tittabawassee CAG is now meeting once a quarter. We have the Velsicol Community Advisory Group meeting once a month. So it really depends on what the community needs are to determine what kind of frequency that would be. And affiliation. CAGs are not an EPA-sanctioned group. This is an independent group, and it's not EPA approved in that sense. It's an independent community organization, but EPA can provide support. Sometimes that blocks, getting tools to help community members do that, we can provide support on that and facilitation and those kinds of things. We can provide communities the resources they need there. And this does not absolve us for our responsibilities for communication, not take the place of the community engagement that our agencies are still responsible for. So this is in addition to. So again, what does a CAG do? Hold regular meetings. They meet with the EPA and state to learn about site-related issues, so there's that information exchange. Provide recommendations and advice to us as agencies. Review technical information about the cleanup and environmental problems, and work with us to solve those problems. And create a connection and communicate what you've learned. Throughout the interview process, it's interesting, people get their information from all different kinds of sources. Maybe it's media, maybe it is the agencies, but maybe it's their neighbor. So some folks, the information are community members. And so the CAG can serve as that source of information so they can feel like they're getting information that they can trust. So important things to consider. The makeup of a community advisory group needs to be balanced. It needs to represent its community and its diverse points of view. Another thing is that these meetings are open to the public. These aren't closed-door meetings. So even if you aren't part of that 15 to 25 person membership, you can still come to meetings. And then there's some time commitment. So it's a volunteer type of activity where you would come and spend, some can spend 4 to 8 hours a month learning about the site, coming to meetings, and working on developing input back to the agencies. This next part of as we wrap this up and we get into the question and answer, I just wanted to talk a little bit about why. While I go over a couple of these points, I'm going to be a community member that I had the pleasure of meeting through the interview process. But why a CAG? Again, that does provide that improved access in general, and people who are affected by Superfund sites and have the right to know what the agency is doing. It provides a stronger voice. Again, collective, it provides, the stronger voice that is maybe not as strong on an individual basis. A deeper understanding of the issues for the community, but it gives us a better, deeper understanding of the community as well. So it really provides a service for us to do better at our jobs. Better input, taking time, there's constant contact, so there's always information exchange. And finding common ground, a way to get something that maybe doesn't make us happy, but something that we can all live with. So I just wanted to bring Jen over here and just to talk about why a CAG for this community. This is on. Yep.
Hi, my name's Jenny. I moved into my Belmont home 8 years ago. I'm not new to this area. I actually graduated from this high school. I thought it was surreal seeing my son walk these same halls. But what was more surreal was September 2017, sitting right here in this front row. I was looking up at this screen, seeing my house circled with just a handful of others because we were contaminated with PFAS. A lot has happened since then. Watched of you also found out that you too were contaminated. I can't believe that all of this is happening here. I just keep thinking that I don't want to spend the next several years finding out from the news or the next letter on my doorstep what's going to happen to my family. I'm sure many of you feel the same way as I do. I spend a lot of time looking up, trying to find the latest news, and there's just so many outlets, like Diane said, that you can find the information, different websites, Facebook groups, but when you do find the information, you don't know if you found the latest reports or the most accurate. If there was just one place that had everything all together, such as this community advisory group, to build a website, one place that has everything. It would be really helpful. When I met Diane, she introduced me, and I thought it would be a great fit for our community. We have 3 sites that were discussed here tonight. We could bring together affected residents, Street, Wolverine, Jewel, and the Tannery, local business owners, city of Plainfield Township, environmental interest groups like CCRR, and also medical professionals who practice in our community. We need one source of truth, a dedicated group that we can trust and who will be committed for the long road ahead. With all of the inconsistencies that we're going through during this time, I think we deserve to have a community advisory group that will give us a sense of stability. The group, once established, like Diane said, will meet on a regular basis. And everyone will be open to find all the information. I'm really optimistic about this opportunity. We've all been through a lot, and I know most have lost trust in a lot of different ways, myself included. But taking a step and trying to work together will be better than standing still. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. And just talking about the near-term activities, at this time I'd like to ask Rick Radeski to come up and kind of fill us in on where are we at with the CAG development process. I have a timeline here displayed here, near-term, some CAG informational meetings, and start organizing. And then, continuing into the summer and fall with activities. But I'll have Rick kind of expound upon where we're at with those things now. Thank you.
Well, I wanted to thank Jenny again for those comments, and I think her presentation really outlines the need and the importance of having community involvement. Both the EPA and the DEQ recognize community involvement in major programs as far as watershed management and also for areas of concern. These are areas in the Great Lakes restoration, in the hazardous waste area with the CAG groups. And the purpose of these groups, again, is that you get all the information. So instead of waiting for something in the newspaper, or instead of trying to pick something out of a social media site, that information is provided to the CAG. They to meet on a monthly basis, and we don't have to wait for meetings like this. We can invite the EPA, we can invite the DEQ, we can invite public health to make presentations to answer our questions. So it gives power to the citizens, and then finally we get to comment on the site activities. We're not providing oversight, we're not involved with enforcement or litigation, but we certainly can take citizen concerns and our own concerns and talk about what's going on the site, what needs to be done in the future, what kind of programs need to be put forth. And it's just a good way to get things done and to move forward. And it's going to take a long time. I've been involved with the public advisory councils for Muskegon Lake and White Lake, and I've been doing it for 25 years. So for complex issues, it takes a long time, and it's important to have these groups that are involved. Initial meetings with some core groups of citizens and stakeholders. We had one with some watershed groups. We have the Elgro organization for the Grand River. Trout Unlimited has the watershed organization for the Rogue River, and then we had some meetings with the municipalities and the CCRR, and that was the first time that we got together as a group, and we all had a pretty similar vision. We had a second and we brought in some other stakeholders, education, K through 12 education, Chamber of Commerce, residents from the Tannery area and from House Street. And a lot of questions were raised about voting members and ex officio members and how they get grants and things like that. So we kind of handed this off to the EPA to bring in a facility. We have scheduled on April 18th at the Kent District Library in Plainfield Township. And that will be a facilitated meeting to help form the community advisory group. So everybody's welcome to attend, and we really need medical professionals to join our group, and we also need residents from the Wolverine and Jewel area to join our group. And again, the power is to all be together, to get the information, to work as a group in terms of commenting on the information, reviewing the information, and getting that information back to the community and back to the EPA and the DEQ. So I, again, think this is a real positive step, and I invite everybody, anybody that's interested, to come to the meeting on the 18th of April, and we'll talk more about it, and we'll have a facilitator there to help us through answering all. We have parties, and we have voting members and interested members of the public, so we have to navigate all those issues, and it can be done. I mean, we've done that with, again, Muskegon Lake and White Lake, and I think I'm committed, and there's a number of members of the community that are committed to move forward on this. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, and just to reiterate, April 18th, the District Library, Plainfield Township District Library, 5:30 to 7:30. So hope to see many of you there. And I think we're getting to the part where,
Yes.
so I don't know if I want to take a break, because I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, we're running just a little bit behind, so I'll have you, everybody stand up for 2 seconds. We were going to take a quick break, but I don't want to let you go quite yet. So just stand up. If you have cards, pass, or if you want to line up at the mics, we're going to do questions and answers now. So if you have a question that you feel comfortable going ahead and lining up at the mic, go ahead and line up. Otherwise, hand your card, hold it over your head, and we'll collect those and grab the cards so that we can take questions and answers in just 2 seconds. discuss this with them, and if it requires us to do litigation, which we're already in, then that's what we'll do.
Thank you. Is there another card you wanted to, Jeff?
Yeah, go ahead and do that one.
Okay, so I'm going to combine two of the, I'm going to read them both, but I'm going to give an answer to both questions at once. It'll make sense. So EPA is studying the Tannery and House Street. Why not Wolf and Jewel? Second question, how can Wolf and Jewel get, et cetera? The short answer is EPA actually did test Wolf and Jewel. We have, in the federal government, we have a Privacy Act clause. I am not allowed to show you sample results from a private person's property. We have the regulation there to protect private citizens in the United States. It's a federal rule. In general, though, without giving out any specifics for any individuals, what I can say is we shared that data with DEQ in the same areas they sampled for PFAS and found quite a bit of PFAS. We found very incredibly low levels, if any, hazardous substances. We looked for it there, we just didn't find it. We are still working with DEQ. If there are other areas that need to be investigated and looked at, that's why we're teaming together. But we did, in fact, actually investigate that area. At the same time, they did their sampling.
Yep. And I just also want to note, the permanent groundwater monitoring wells that are installed, they're sampled for all of the chemicals of concern, not just PFAS. It's just that PFAS is more soluble, and that's what we're finding distributed through the aquifer.
In the future, if other things arise, there could be a time where that sampling leads us to look into other areas of soil contamination potential. So, but hopefully that answered both of those. And then the third question on that sheet was, do whole house filters protect against metals, VOCs, et cetera? I will start by saying not a whole house filter expert, but what I would say is I do know there are some filters that can filter out other things such as lead, right? They're using a lot of filters in other areas for lead in water, other metals. It's got to be rated. You got to make sure you're using a filter that has been tested for that compound. And the easiest way to make sure you're doing that is reach out to your county health folks and your state health folks who have that information and can help advise you on safe drinking water. And EPA's drinking water folks as well. We have a rep here tonight from our drinking water group. And if you have those questions, reach out to DEQ, local health, or EPA, to our water folks, and they can help you answer those questions, if we know what your contamination concern is.
Along those same lines, Jeff, I've got a question here that says, what happens to the well filters once they are consumed or filled? How or where are these disposed of after use? And maybe this should go to Karen or Mark. Sorry.
Yeah, so basically the carbon, granular activated carbon, is picked up by the manufacturer, or they switch out the tanks, and then it is taken to their facility. The maker of this, the carbon that is being used in North Kent is Calgon, and basically they regenerate it. It involves very high temperatures to make the PFAS not adhere to the carbon anymore. And then once they have that concentrated stream, they use high temperatures to incinerate that, which breaks up the PFAS bonds. So basically it captures the PFAS and then they remove it off of the carbon after the carbon's attached it. And it's a very complex process, but it's done by the carbon manufacturer, and then they then certify that the PFAS has been removed and destroyed. And so that's kind of the only process that we currently have that will destroy the PFAS bonds. It involves very high temperatures.
Thank you. We're getting close to 8:30. We got quite a line, so let's go ahead and go to the mic here. You could ask your question. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. We're new to the area, just moved here from the east side of Michigan. Appreciate everybody's information tonight. This is new for us, but, it's pretty concerning, to be honest with you. Our kids go to school a block from the tannery, and I didn't see one test for the school and the children, one block over from the tannery, and that's a huge concern for me and my wife coming to this area, putting a lot of trust in this area, and make sure their safety is there, especially with the young lady that was before me talking about the health risks. So is there any, thought of testing the school grounds, mile from this possible site contamination?
I think we can talk about the school, the drinking water for the school would be municipal water, which would be the city of Rockford, which has been tested numerous times now and has always come back non-detect or below detection limits for PFAS. Usually we would not do testing unless we would have some reason to indicate that there would have been waste, disposed in those areas over time. I don't know the age of that particular school, but if you've got specific concerns, we can definitely look into it. I think we haven't gone to the school probably because nothing has led us there, as none of the evidence has suggested that there would be any waste at the school or any indication of concern. If any of the studies that Jeff's group or our group do lead us in that direction, then we would definitely step over there. But so far, the data, all the soil samples, all of the data that we have on site at the tannery, as well as along the Rogue River, they haven't really led us in that direction.
Okay. And then the last one I have, and I'll make it quick. The streams, we live northeast of town, off Northland, just south of 14 Mile.
Yep.
Haven't heard any talks of the water spread up there, but is there a possibility that it's a problem in our well?
Based on the data we have now, there's nothing that we know of in that area. We've looked at some dump sites, or what were alleged to be dump sites up in that neck of the woods, and none of them panned out to be sites of concern. We have some third-party testing from up that way that hasn't indicated an issue. Based on, from the three main areas of study, there wouldn't be groundwater flow from those areas up to.
Can we take one more question here, and then I know we've got a gentleman over here as well.
Okay.
This is a question from a citizen. I think the citizen has left, but I suspect other people have the same question. Is it possible solution to dig our wells deeper to access deeper aquifers that do not contain PFAS?
So it's really going to depend where you are. In some areas of the study, the shallow water is impacted. In other areas, it's the deeper part of the aquifer that's impacted. There'd have to be consideration of what the specific geology in that area is. There's also difficulty with some of the bedrock wells in the area don't produce well, or they don't produce quality water well. So that is a possibility in some areas, but not all areas. It really does have to be taken on a site-by-site or specific parcel-by-parcel basis.
Okay, thank you for that question. We had a question here, sir.
Yes, I want to first thank all of you. I believe you got into environmental sciences because you are concerned about the environment, and all the work and diligence you've done towards this is appreciated. But the truth is, you answer to hire people, and some of those are politically appointed. So first of all, I'd like to know how many, I know everyone in this audience probably agrees that we've already diagnosed the problem. It's a serious problem. We're not going to spend 10 years with a Superfund cleanup. We're not going to drill new wells. The only answer is a municipal water supply. Now, granted, that has to be done through the courts and everything else, but I would like to know what your input is as far as how serious you think it is, and if you think something needs to be done as fast as possible. I want to know, I would like to know, I'm sure they would like to know, how much communication do you have with our politicians? Because right now on the state level, we have primarily a Republican legislature that has been environmentally negligent for years. Now you that works for the DEQ, I'm sure your heart and souls are into the environment, but on the previous term we had a governor that pushed through Enbridge, which pumps millions and millions of gallons of oil sludge under Lake Huron and Lake Michigan. They also polluted Kalamazoo River. We've got Nestle Corporation pumping billions of gallons of aquifer water out of state with no tax liabilities out to the state of Michigan. And the politicians that are in here should be ashamed of themselves. They haven't got any backbone. So I'd like to know what you think of this crisis and how often you communicate with the politicians to put your point across. Because right now we have for the Environmental Protection Agency, we have a fossil fuel CEO that runs the EPA. So he doesn't give a you-know-what about the environment. And same thing in the DEQ, we've got an environmental council that they voted on last year that's pushed through that's got more commercial people, industrial people than they do environmentalists on that panel. So I'd like to have those answers.
Thank you.
So can I take that, Diane?
Yeah?
We share your concerns. We really do. I think that for my standpoint, I've been with DEQ going on 27 years, and we've seen the change. We see the changes through the political party. What I can tell you is different about PFAS is that I've never seen such good legislative response for an emerging contaminant as we have for this, and it has been bipartisan. Now, I'm not going to defend any political party because that's not what I do. I'm here to defend the people. I'm here to defend the environment. But I will tell you, we've gotten, because of this issue in Rockford, I truly believe it's because of this issue in Rockford that we've even got an MPART that is answering to the governor's office for this issue. I truly believe it's the only because of this issue that we got $23 million last year for PFAS to address the state, to do statewide municipal sampling. There is not another state in the union that has done that. So it's easy to go there, but I really urge you then to look past that and to get the collaboration going, because we've got the momentum, we've got the legislature's attention, we've got bipartisan support. Let's keep it going and let's get the solutions out there, because these are tough problems. We can't do it with one party. We've got to do it with all the people. And you guys care, and your voices matter. You get listened to. I can speak, I can tell what I think needs to be done, but our voices don't get heard. So it's you guys sitting in the seats that make the difference. So I appreciate your concerns. I appreciate your passion. Thanks.
Did you want to go to a card briefly there? And
yep, we got one more card up here.
The map showing the investigation area and groundwater flow indicate a lot of testing west of Packer Drive, but none to the east in the Blythefield area. Is that area intended to be tested? So we did ask Wolverine to sample on either side of the Rogue River, as well as we just recently requested that monitoring wells be installed east of the river. At this time, it looks like most of the plumes are either terminating at the Rogue River, or if they are underflowing the Rogue River, it's in an area more south of the Blythefield area where there has been testing. Certainly, if additional data comes forth and we see the risk, that the testing areas will be expanded. But at this time, it just, based on, again, I'll always preface it on the data that we have at this time, it seems like there isn't a major plume from either House Street or Woven Jewel in that area.
Great. Okay, we have time, we're a little over, but Lynn, I don't want to forget you, so can you be our last question?
Is there any, okay. Well, I have one comment to make. During the lame duck session, some of the environmental laws were weakened during, in December, but I know that all three of you from the DEQ signed a letter encouraging, and many others from the DEQ signed a letter encouraging that legislation not to pass, and I appreciate that. My question is actually two of them. One of them is they're related actually. I moved here in 1991 with my family, and we drank from the Rogue River for 8 years. I talked to a number of people who are concerned about that. Mm-hmm. I think of the tannery workers who worked in this, and I asked myself, wouldn't it be valuable to have people who raised families in Rockford whose children may go on to have thyroid problems and this and that, even though we don't have a number, to at least have their blood tested? And if you're waiting for 400 more people, and I say this out loud because I know there are people here from the DHHS and Kent County, certainly I think it would be very valuable to test the tannery workers, many of them who have failing health, And I think it would be valuable to involve the people who lived in water before we were changed over to a new well in 2000. And it's a question that's been asked before, but it sort of hangs there, and I'm asking it again. I'm hoping maybe the CAG could pick it up, but it's a question.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's a good question, Lynn. And I'm going to send the first part of that back to DHHS, because if there's going to be any blood testing, that's up to them and how they structure that study. I think for the current exposure assessment, that's not within the realm of what they're looking at, but I don't know
aware
if
of
they
that,
would
yes.
consider additional subcategories within that could be done. Because I agree that that's a concern. We don't have any way to evaluate what those drinking water
I understand that. I'm
concentrations
putting the
would have been.
question out so it falls on a number of ears out there.
Yeah.
I think it's important, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
I did want to point out, if there is an FAQ document on michigan.gov/Belmont site, so there's been a lot of questions compiled there. Take a look, see if maybe there's some, if you had any other questions, maybe take a look at that section of the website and see if there might be some answers for you.
Again, if you didn't hear your question answered or you've got other questions, feel free to contact any of us anytime. We're here to serve you, and I appreciate your time, attention, and patience tonight. And thank you. Travel safe. Have a good spring break.
Thank you.